to every Zoom goer knows that we're about to get going. Recording in progress. All right, we'll start going here and making our way through today's agenda. This is meeting 3 of the Clatsop County or Clatsop Regional Housing Task Force. And I watched the last couple of Zooms, so I'm going to try to stop saying a lot. That's right. You know, you catch yourself now when in Zoom land. So anyhow, the materials I've got on the table for today include kind of a worksheet. And I want to first say that we have been sending out through MailChimp, one of that MailChimp service, back when they named everything after some kind of a Survey Monkey, MailChimp, all those software things. We've been sending out through that email service, and a lot of people are saying they're not getting emails. And so from now on, you will probably receive, or my goal is on Wednesdays to send out these kind of homework assignments, or at least updates, notes, all those things on Wednesdays. And so if you're not receiving those, or you're not getting MailChimp things, let me know. I'm going to check with our IT department, because it's interesting, because Gil gets them for the county with a county address, but the other counties, Amanda said she wasn't getting them and others aren't getting them. And so there's something going on. And so that may be from our end or something, I'm thinking, you know, because I don't think, Amanda, did you check junk just to see if it's hitting your junk box or, you know? Okay. Well, so we'll look into that, but until that time, maybe for the next month, I'll send it through our normal, I'll just copy out the from MailChimp and then get it to you guys. So you may be getting double, but until we get this worked out, I'd rather be redundant than you guys not getting the materials, because I've been putting homework assignments in them, and we're not getting a lot of results on that, but we'll get to that. So this is the worksheet. We'll go through that today. Where we're trying to go, the timeline is on the back. I've updated it for the next monthly quarter through the quarter. And so my goal, you know, today is we're looking at capacity building. Tomorrow next month we'll be looking at asset mapping, and then we'll look at hopefully we'll get a consensus to move forward with this kind of timeline. We'll talk about this at the end of the day. The organizational alignment, then an operational action plan, and then mapping growth and how we're going to do that moving forward. So the other materials come from Summit County, and what the first one is called building housing. I'll talk about it in a minute here. That's in your packet. It's a portion of a document that is much heftier, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then the last thing is a draft deed restriction guideline for the region. And so I've just taken kind of Summit counties and drafting it towards anyone can use kind of document for us. And so we'll talk about that today as well. And so I'm Jeff Adams, Community Development Director for the City of Cannon Beach, if you don't know that. And I'm just heading up this effort for now. And we've got Denise Loughlin from Crest who's helping me out, and we'll be starting helping them with facilitation of some of the homework and tasks as we move into this. The way that timeline is drafted, this month and next month, it'll still be kind of mainly me doing some of the presentation, working us through some of the examples. But then after those examples, my goal is then to start working at the desktop level and maybe even some of the subcommittees and getting some of these documents and done and some of the things by the end of this period. So, so if we want to kind of start with here, And who do we, let's just introduce, that's the first thing. Here's the agenda. We're gonna go through introductions, then we'll go to a little review of meeting 2. Then we'll have Alyssa speak, the director for the Northwest Housing, or Northwest Oregon Housing. And is it NW or is it just NO?
You know what, it's both. It drives me crazy, actually.
Yeah, I've seen them both.
Let's take a poll, either way.
Yeah, okay. And then we were gonna have someone from one of the mountain communities speak, but we're gonna save that and have 2 or 3 at the next. But I did reach out to a few, and I'll summarize some of those discussions, and then we'll talk through that and documents. Then we'll just have a little summary of our mission, vision, and plan exercise. We'll talk about capacity building, the main thing that we're talking about today, and introduce a few of the key documents, what I call the foundation documents, a lot of work that we're going to have to be doing, and then talk about our timeline and next steps. So, Robert, you want to?
Robert St. Clair, City of Cannon Beach.
Gail Henderson, Clatsop County.
Jeff Flores, Seaside.
Jake Lake, City of Warren.
Alyssa Goodwin, Northwest Oregon Housing Authority.
Jared Kronowski, Columbia Memorial Hospital.
Brandon Oakley, Cannon Beach City Council. Steve Ray, Seaside City Council. Bruce St. James, Cannon Beach City Manager. John Twayoka, Clatsop County Commissioner for District 2. I'm Don Boone, County Manager.
Denise Loughlin, Crest.
Bengal Daily Escort. Brett Estes, Department of Land Conservation and Development, Regional Solutions Team.
Commander Alvenshaw, Clatsop County.
Chad Rice, Northwest Housing Solutions.
Did you settle on the name? All right, I like it. Okay. And so, next. Okay, so we're review of meeting 2. Could we have the next slide there? So first off, we had our presenters in meeting 2 with Amanda and Zach. Did a little, you can go to the next slide, little dashboard update on where we're going with mapping of the, oh, sorry, did we get the introduction of Zoom personnel?
I was just going to ask that question.
Hey, Brent,
This is Brent, City Councilor from Gerhardt.
yeah, thanks, Brent. We can't see you on the way this is set up. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Who else do we have?
Later, Brian with City of Gilbert. I'm planning assistant.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, there's Nancy, the Zachary Hunt.
Oh, yeah, Zach was we were just talking about. And Nancy, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Nancy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, not really. I'm Nancy McCarthy, City Councilor from Cannon Beach.
Hey, Nancy.
Hi.
Welcome. Yeah, so takeaways just from the kind of discussion on the affordable housing workforce apps and dashboard that they're working on with the county. Monica Still also talked about surplus lands. And so this is kind of the first effort towards mapping some of this and to provide kind of that information pipeline on housing supply. And so I think this is a great first step. One of the things that I think they spoke about and I'm most excited about is it's from our perspective as well on the land use side, is that we can update these things. Then we get these kind of counts of where they are through the process. And so as we get into the asset mapping, especially next month, we hope to, work with Zach and the county on, where are our buildable lands, where are our needs. I know Jay and others are looking at this kind of things and start mapping those and building where do we want to grow and how we want to grow scenario. So next up. And so then we had TJ Pirelli from Tillamook County Housing Committee. And, the takeaways for me for that is just that they're doing this in a rural county along the coast, and there's already an effort on the way. So I think it's great having that kind of a partner in this as to develop with and to see some of the programs and some of the tools that they're using. I think not only it's inspirational for us, but it also kind of gives us, something to kind of bounce our ideas off of, see how if they're trying that, what's their learning from what they're doing. Okay, next up. So mission, vision, and plans. All right, we had our early discussion of a mission and vision statement. We can go to the next one. And we came up with this: provide a regional platform for resolving workforce housing needs by partnering across jurisdictions to build effective policies and programs which lead to projects to build an inventory of wonderful places to call home and sustain community. And it was a first effort in the mission statement. Next up, then we ask, okay, what about the vision? Where do we want our community or communities to be in 2032, 10 years out? And due to the work of this task force, and there was a lot of things said, changing the percentage, right now, I think I showed that slide, it's 4% to the other jurisdictions out in Colorado and Utah, and those areas around 20 to 30% of their housing stock is in affordable housing. Ours is around 4%. We want to move that meter on that and increase that. But one of my favorites was, they won't need us. So if we're doing this task force 10 years from now, the goal is they won't need us. That's our vision. So next up, but the takeaway is this, and this is what, when I reach out to these communities that have been working on this for 30, 40 years, this is from, I believe this is this is probably Telluride or Sun Valley, Summit counties. And so this showed you from, I think, a 2018 study, and this shows you where they're at. So this is their average sold through their workforce housing need restricted, and that's where it falls on the AMI line, right around 160 or so. Their average free market's off the chart, okay? And this is where they're constructing and they're focusing their efforts on their rentals and other units. And so next slide, please. So how do we measure success? So this is an example, or this is pulled from data from 1990 to 2020, and that is showing the estimate of the median household income for Clatsop County. Okay, so it starts down there around 24,000, ends up at 64,000. That's the median household income. Next slide, please. This is from 2003. The farthest I could go back in Zillow to 2022. And you can see this is the average sale price or median sale price for homes. And the difference there, next slide, showing income versus homes is that difference, that gap. So the free market is not going to close that gap. That's what they realized in these mountain communities for 30 to 40 years. And so next slide, please. This is that slide I showed previously, the last one. This is from San Miguel County, Telluride area, and that mountain tech community. This is their housing in 1990 to current around 2018 when this report was done. So this is their market rate units. This is their deed restricted units, that secondary market that I talk about. And so, and that's the average number of units over those years. And so going back 30 years, next slide. So after 30 years, the need remains. They're always going to need this task force. We're always, these communities may not need this task force, but they're going to need this organization that we set up through this task force. And so that's why we're here. And that's why I think this effort is so important to this community. There's not a day that somebody doesn't come in and say they're excited about this work and they need this work now. And so one of the things I want to say, I was talking to Steve prior to the meeting. My community, my community development administrative assistant, Katie, resigned. She's going down. I'm happy for her, really, I am. she's going to home, back to Coos Bay, because she got a job down there and moving the family down there. But it's mainly because of housing. We went out, the exact same job description as 2 years ago at the exact same time when we hired her. And you know, that was COVID. And we had 39 applications for her job 2 years ago. We had 8. I can guarantee you a large reason is housing. And the reason she left was housing. So this is going to continue, it's going to get worse. So next, so it brings us to capacity. So next slide, please. We're going to let Alyssa speak. I think that's a perfect lead in. And if you like, Alyssa just came here from the Portland metro area. How long were you working in Portland metro?
Let's just say 25 plus years.
Okay, excellent.
Given that I'm only 28 and I'm starting.
And so, Alyssa, if you want to come up here, however you want to do it, I know you don't have a presentation, but yeah, so Alyssa's going to speak a little bit about the Northwest Housing Authority, but also her new role and, you know, how that organization, how they're changed and how they hope to work with us moving forward.
Okay, well, so for the Zoom people, right?
Yeah, it'd be better for sound as well.
Let's all know hybrid meetings, this new world that we're in. Hi, no, people who can't see me and people who can see me. It is been a long time since I've actually stood in front of a room full of people in person. So it's really nice that this is the meeting that I'm doing it at. Jeff introduced my name. My name is Alyssa Gertler. I'm the new director of the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority, whatever acronym you want to use. One day we're going to figure that out. I have been on the job 2.5 months. I moved to Astoria a little bit before that in early July. So I've been living here for about 3 months. I love living in Astoria. I'm so glad I came. I loved Portland for 30 years, but I really like living in Astoria a lot. And, you know, I also moved here in July, like summer's been really nice. Ask me again in December how I'm doing. Although I've been living in Portland, I know how it goes, wet, it's dark. So it's a really interesting segue that Jeff sort of laid out around this group, working together, collaborating. You know, my background in Portland is my most recent job was at Metro at the regional government, which is 3-county government that does planning and development. I was the director of planning and development there. And so it's really a good opportunity to now work in another 3-county government. The Northwest Oregon Housing Authority serves Columbia, Clatsop, and Tillamook counties. And I think most of us in this room, just by the fact that we're at a regional task force, we understand that housing isn't a city line, county line kind of issue. It crosses multiple lines and affects multiple people. One thing I'm really noticing here as I sort of get used to living in a coastal environment is the connection between the sort of economy and economic development hopes and dreams of the communities and the housing hopes and dreams of the communities. And so I think that's a really interesting conversation for us to have. So I took over the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority in July. Many of you probably know its checkered past better than I do. I'm starting to learn a little bit about it. It has struggled. It has had difficult management issues. It has also had difficulty attracting good staff over the years. And in 2020, there was kind of a, let's just call it a like rock bottom moment. And the board came in and said, hey, we're gonna clean house. We're gonna get rid of all the people who are here now. We got in trouble with HUD. Our funding was threatened, and that's what's really bad about that is when you don't get funding from HUD, people lose their apartments, and we were like, the board was like, I'm out, we have to fix this right now. And so for the last couple of years, the board has brought in a consulting firm from the East Coast called Quadell, who has taken over our housing voucher program and also brought in a guy named Jim Evans to serve as the interim director. I think many of you may have met him. And he basically fire fought for a couple of years, right? He found where the fires were, where the issues were, where the crises were, and tried to get things back on track and said, all right, here's what we need to do with HUD. Here's what we need to do with our properties that we own. Here's what we need to do with our processes and procedures. I give the guy a lot of credit. He kept the train from falling off the cliff, but he would be the first guy to say, like, I had no idea where the train was going or what was in it. I just didn't want it to blow up. And so I think that's where you find me now, like, where is this train going? What is it actually carrying? And so what is the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority kind of in our new incarnation? What do we look like now and what are we trying to do? Well, we own hundreds of apartment units in Clatsop, Columbia, and Tillamook County. And they're not just any old housing units. They're housing units for very low income people, right? That's what a housing authority does, right? In the spectrum of housing that Jeff was talking about and that we all work in. Yes, it's workforce housing, but it's housing for people who make 30% of median income or below. So, you know, that's for a family of two, that's like $30,000 a year. And so you can think about, you know, and it goes all the way down to people who make zero, who are on fixed incomes or who are on disability and who don't have any other way of generating income. So we play a really specific role in low income housing. And, you know, I moved to Astoria. I have a good job. I know how to work in housing. I could not find a place to live, you guys. Right? It is, right? All of us can go around the room. What's our housing story? Everyone has a housing story. And thank goodness I found one. But one of the things we are learning, right? We have tons and tons and tons of people on our waiting list who are qualified and ready for a place to live, and we don't have a place for them to live. And that's not, these are the people at the lowest end of the market. These are not the people competing with people like us or people who are actually making more resources, which is a problem in itself, right? For what we've all talked about, attracting and retaining workers here. And so just as a quick overview of what the Housing Authority's portfolio is, in Clatsop County, we own a couple buildings that you may know. One is in Seaside, it's called Clatsop Shores. It's on Roosevelt, it's at the north end of Seaside. We own one called Sand Hill, which is on Wahana, here in Seaside. We own the Owens and Dare building, which is a big old former hospital in Astoria. It has 46 units in it for people who are senior and disabled. There's a big empty parking lot right next door. We are about to build 50 more units on that lot, also for senior and disabled. And it's also our first foray into permanent supportive housing, providing wraparound services for people who've been experiencing homelessness. That's a partnership with Clatsop Community Action, which is very exciting. We will actually have on-site resident services and management that we don't have now. So all 96 units together will have enriched services that they don't have now. But, you know, keep an eye on, we're gonna have a big old construction project happening over there in downtown Astoria. I live like 5 blocks away, so if you care at all about 15th and Exchange, trying to go to Fort George, just pay attention. CMH, we might need to borrow your park.
I don't know if any of us know about it.
Well, and I'm happy, like, here I am. I'd like to, you know, if you want me to come talk to you guys, we would be happy to.
More about the
Yeah, no, and we want to make sure you're like, we don't cause any more disruption than we have to. I keep saying like, I'm having a honeymoon period. People are so happy to see me. And then I'm gonna blow up that parking lot in downtown Astoria. Maybe I won't have as many friends as I do now. That's okay, because we're gonna end up housing 50 more families in a couple of years. So what else do we have in Clatsop County? I think we have anything else. We do own a few other properties. Oh, we're doing a 42 unit development in Warrenton as well. Big shout out to Warrenton, to my friend Jay over there, who is trying to really be, I think, an example of what we're all talking about here. What can local governments do to facilitate housing development from bottom to top? What's the land issue? What's the regulation issue? What's the political issue? What's the money issue? And I think that's kind of where we're all at is, you know, as Jeff's been alluding to, and as I've talked with a few of you about, right? It's going to take us all to put the pieces together. It's not one solution and it's not one player and it's not one funding source. So I guess where I'm at with NOAA is we got to really start by putting our own house in order. We got to make sure these properties are well run and well maintained. We're taking care of the people who live there. Frankly, just so you guys know, there used to be like 25 people who ran this 3-county, hundreds of units. There are 4 people who run this organization, and we're trying to staff up and get some capacity in partnership with Clatsop County. You guys see me smiling at Don. But I think there's a recognition that we're trying to serve Clatsop County and frankly all 3 counties and be partners and need additional capacity. But what we're really starting to do is just try to make sure that we're running the properties we have well and getting our house continue in order so that we can be a good partner. But in conversations with a lot of you, it's clear that we have to do more than just rent apartments poor people. Like, that's what we do, and we need to do that well. But there is this larger conversation about what is going on with housing in our communities. How does it affect people's well-being and their health? How does it affect our economy? How does it affect, the people, like, just the sense of community of people who grew up here and want to stay here, people who want to bring their families here. We all have stories of people who are leaving because of their housing situation, one way or the other. And so I'm starting to recognize that in addition to us being a very good housing authority, our other key goal is being a very good partner. And really thinking about how we now play a role in facilitating what cities are hoping to do, what counties are hoping to do, bringing in developers who have sort of the right alignment with our goals of the community. And frankly, some of you guys have been through ups and downs, right? I was talking to Jeff, I was like, is this project controversial? Yep. Is this project controversial? Yep. She's like, it's Cannon Beach, everything is controversial, right? And I talked to Megan Leatherman, like, hey, how's that going? I'm like, you guys have a hard job who are doing community development and planning at the city level and county level. And we need to kind of support each other, right? Each community has its own character, its own needs, its own flavor. And here's the housing authority. You're all supposed to be our clients. And so the question is, how do we now play a role in facilitating what you're trying to accomplish, building the partnerships, figuring out money. I used to be a federal lobbyist for Clackamas County, and one of my favorite things is to go figure out like how to get money for counties. And so I can't always be the housing authority and get the grant, but maybe Clatsop gets the grant or Seaside gets the grant, and maybe we find some additional resources that we can do together. So that's all I got after about 2.5 months, you guys. But I'm really happy to meet you all. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. I think, I've heard from a lot of you like, hey, we haven't really seen much Noah in a while. And when we have seen you, we're not sure what you're about. And so here I am, I'm showing up. I want to be part of this conversation, and I want to get to know you guys a little bit better and how I can be helpful. So any questions or?
I was just wondering, is NOAA only allowed to work on affordable housing, or can they work on workforce, above the 30% poverty level?
We can work on anything we want, right?
Okay.
As my board chair keeps reminding me, hey, Alyssa, you're in charge, you can do whatever you want. But our funding sources are usually restricted. The money that comes from HUD, our low income housing tax credits, affordable housing finances, so complicated with multiple different kinds of sources, with different kinds of requirements. Now, we have been a partner in projects where we put in what are called project-based vouchers, where we put in essentially like a rent buy down for certain units, like the Merwin apartments, which are in downtown Astoria. We put some money into the project that way. But in general, things like land, there's a lot of ways we can be a partner, even if it's not necessarily with our money, and seeking additional money, things like that. I've already talked to some local folks about different developers and different experiences they've had, and kind of found the ones that seem like, hey, they're well aligned with the community values and they work well with local government, and the ones who are like, hey, they're the big jerks from Portland who come in and throw their weight around and they're not really fun to work with. And so we can even help like that, like, hey, that's a good partner. Hey, maybe heads up on that partner. So depending on what you're thinking. And we are partnering with Providence right now on a project here in Seaside, and you guys probably know more about it than I do, where we'll be putting some vouchers in around workforce housing. So very open to any idea.
Great.
And I think just if I could, part of it from the county's perspective is that, all boats rise at some level. And for us, allowing Alyssa and Noah to venture out of that strict federal housing program area is what we're buying capacity for, is not only allow them to do the things that they're supposed to do really well, but is to help us because they are housing experts. And so we want to leverage their expertise, because as everybody knows, Clatsop County has housing staff. We don't have any housing staff. And so we need to have expertise and the capacity of that expertise. And if we all benefit from it, then we're all better for it. And so what she was mentioning from the county is that early in our concept plan, we had talked about helping NOAA with their capacity, because I think some of what Alyssa said is very true, which is, as we've talked about housing, NOAA hasn't really been part of our conversation. And so having her and staff be able to do that and do things like potentially have a pre-development, a pre-development grant program. So that as ideas come, there's an ability to then try to operationalize them as soon as possible. And with her background, there's a chance there are other revenue sources out there that could come to bear and actually help us do that. And from my experience, that's what ultimately greases the skids to get projects forward moving. And so I think there's so much possibility now that Alyssa's here that we have to take advantage of it. So that's what the county is trying to do, is leverage her organization, and try to do more outside the federal government.
Yeah, one thing I've learned is when you're competing for state money or federal money, you don't want to be competing with each other. You want to always put your best foot forward, right? And so it's like this opportunity to work on maybe a pre-development fund or a pre-development program where we're all sort of looking at, hey, what about this one? What about this one? Hey, this one is one that we want to do here. We want to do this one here. So that we're always putting our best foot forward and sort of have that pre-development discipline, if you will, around making sure that we've got our ducks in a row before we go ask for money, and that our track record speaks for itself. So they're like, oh yeah, these guys have a pipeline, they have a program, they know what they're doing. So I think Don has a really good vision, and I think we're on a good path to starting to get that going, which will, in theory, bring us all resources. So thank you for that vote of confidence.
Seaside will right on. We don't have any housing staff either.
Yeah.
Or Jeff, there's the planning department.
I think before every planner's name, they should say Paul, right?
Yeah.
Or Jeff, or Jeff. Hey, Alyssa, I would do this, okay, I'm gonna do this. Yeah. So one question first. I've heard rumors that new federal legislation sets aside a lot for housing. Is that so?
Yes, that
Okay.
is so. And you know how it is with the federal government. When there's a window, you got to go through it.
That's
'Cause the
right.
window's being
It's gonna close in a hurry.
Yeah.
All right, thank
Thank
you. Yeah, thanks. All right. well,
Yeah.
super-
Oh, I had a
Yeah,
suggestion for Alyssa. This is Brent and Gerhart. So just a word of advice, don't change your name to Home Forward.
Don't worry.
That's an inside joke for Portland. They changed the name of their housing authority, 25 years ago, and they're still struggling with name recognition because everybody doesn't recognize Home Forward and they still call it the Housing Authority.
We're the house.
Yeah,
well, we are.
all right, so, thanks, yeah, so we were gonna have someone from Summit County, Rob Murphy, or Cherie Christensen from Aston Dickin come speak to us, but we're gonna do that next month and work on those next month. And I think that's the agenda hadn't to change the agenda. So I'm gonna jump right into the first homework assignment. So the first, I promised at the last meeting, we were gonna do homework assignment. And this, as we're gonna be talking about capacity building, I've given everybody guerrilla developments, Jolene's first cousin, single residential occupancy, as an example. How many of you guys actually had an opportunity to look at it, check it out? It is exciting, it's a neat project, and so it's really two kind of existing structures, and they kind of combine them there and turn them into live spaces upstairs. I think a kitchen and facilities on one bottom, and then a shop, I think, on another corner. So next. And so then I gave, as part of the weekly homework assignments, some questions, a survey questions. And I said, could the conversion of these two existing structures into a multi-use single residency occupancy development happen in your community? Survey says I only got like 3 responses. I mean, I am let down. And I think one of them was me. But anyhow, these are the kind of questions I think we all have to ask ourselves, because Don said pipeline. I love that word because that's what this is really about. Today's is capacity building, building the infrastructure, the pipelines of housing supply. I've been on the housing capacity working group, and that's all we talk about. And so this is what I'm trying to get to, is that, next slide. These questions form the basis of what can your community, what, if somebody wanted to do something like that in your community now, can they do it? Do you even have the answers? Do you know somebody named Poor Jeff that could answer those questions? Do you have enough Poor Jeffs in your organization? That's the key. And Alyssa spoke to it, you know, what, 20 now down to 3 or whatever? I thought coming from the South, that coming here, we would have these, all these land use people working together and, you know, because they're famous, Oregon land law. Oh, man, Oregon's got it, they're ahead of us. And I come here, there's nobody. And so, you know, one per town planner is, you know, in the mountain community is just unheard of. So especially the level of complexity of some of these questions, okay? So if they're wanting to do that in your community, I can tell you right now, in certain areas of our community, in our downtown area, yes, we could probably do that project, but they couldn't in reality because of these other things. Do your current zoning regulations support such types of development? Jay?
Yeah. Ours do.
You can do it.
Yeah, we have, right now, we have a requirement that housing in our downtown has to be on the second floor. We're getting rid of that.
Okay.
We're going to.
Is there a percentage?
No percentage. And it is going to be as long as in the downtown, you are still have the primary focus of the front facade of the building is commercial.
Yeah.
Any portion of that building can go to a residential use. That's just now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then, would you require additional parking or would they be required to seek a variance? Parking lot. See,
Sure.
that's where we would, you couldn't do it in ours. Because then you'd have to put the parking on site. All of our village character, which our community loves, our little downtown village character. I get people saying, I just love the little walkthroughs that you can go back into these little shops. All of that's because no one is doing what the actual zoning code says, right? And so we're going through a code audit and we're gonna have to do all this changes to our code because what's existing in Cannon Beach is not the code, you know, we would require on-site parking. And unfortunately, something like Jolene's, you know, that's why, in fact, here's a little tidbit for you to take on, is Jolene, the guerrilla development guy, one of the founders called me up at pre-COVID saying, we want to do something like, do you guys know the Zipper or any of their kind of food court areas? And so he wanted to do a food court kind of concept there, maybe living above or something like that. I said, I'd love you to do it, but they have to be through some variants. And they got cold feet. I haven't heard from him since, but that's it because of all of these other things. What, or shall I say, who would keep them affordable? Okay, so that's the other thing. Who would keep these single residency occupancy affordable in your district? I'm going to go back to Jay because he's the one at least spoke up. Could they be affordable? Are they affordable? Would they be affordable?
We wouldn't have any tools in place now.
Yeah.
Unless,
So what, or shall I say, who would, okay, that's now, what if instead they demolished the structure and rebuilt? Would the ordinances allow? And that's what I just spoke to, at least in Cannon Beach. It would be pretty much be difficult. You have to get some variances. Would the neighbors allow? I think that's what is the, in each one of our jurisdictions, that might be the more difficult concept. Okay, if we're going to keep these affordable in certain areas, we get pushback in a lot of communities. And so when we talk about next month, when we start talking about asset mapping, we start talking about mapping and where and how we want to grow, I think that's where we'll start that conversation. Or in other words, where in your community would this be allowed? And so, like I said, only in one of our downtown district in our C1 areas, or midtown, downtown, would something like that even be possible? And again, how would you keep them affordable? So next slide. So I wanted to start off because I thought we will get to where our foundational documents, and this is a good way to start, is trying to figure out this pipeline and what are the barriers or the clogs in those pipes. And to do that, I wanted to give you a few real world examples. So in this homework series, kind of leading up to this, I've provided 2 scenarios of homework assignments. Next month, I hope to give you 2 more, and then we'll be kind of set to talk about each one of those things, which will lead to our foundational documents. But first, we have to come to those terms of use. So affordable housing, as HUD would say, is anything when a household spends no more than 30% of its annual income on housing costs. And then we spoke about workforce housing, kind of in the mountain community context, where it's really housing usually up to like 120 or so a day. Workforce housing in mountain communities, however, as I showed you that one slide where they're deed restricted or way up there, that's because that has a different meaning. If you're working within their community, and this is, we'll get to this deed restriction that I've drafted, you know, that's based upon the model. They work within our region. And as long as they work within our region, then there's certain kind of calculations there, and that range goes up. Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up the definition of affordable housing. You know, there's like, sometimes they call it capital A affordable housing and lowercase a affordable housing. There's like the HUD affordable housing, regulated, right? There's a voucher, there's a regulation, there's a funding source that requires it to stay, as Jeff was saying, probably 30% of the median income and below. And then there's what they call like naturally occurring affordable housing, where people might not be spending more than a certain percentage of their income, but it's not regulated, it's not permanent, there's not a deed restriction, there's not a funding source. Many of the properties we own have long-term deed restrictions that say they have to be sold to someone who will keep them in affordable housing for a certain amount of time, or other sort of real estate things that attach to them. So I just wanted the difference between regulated affordable and naturally occurring affordable. We need both, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. And, you know, the mountain communities call that second natural occurring or workforce housing. Because usually they use the concept of if you're working in our community, you're in that program, or here's what you have to do by what, you know, what are the standards you have to work. So next slide, please. And so Oregon, from statute says, average of all units on the property is made available to families with incomes of 60% or less of the area median income, and whose affordability is enforceable, including as described in ORS, for a duration of no less than 30 years. Okay, next up. The second clause of that, local government shall affordable housing and may not require a zone change or conditional use permit for affordable housing on property. So next up. And this is, I think, what scares, or you know, Henry brought up the last time, is all of these other things, right? So then you're looking at apply, so it does not trigger any requirement that a local government consider an update. Applies when property is zoned to allow for industrial uses only if the property is publicly owned, adjacent to land zoned for residential uses or schools, not specifically designated for heavy industrial uses. So only certain types of industrial. And then D, does not apply on lands where the local government determines, and then you have all of your sensitive land kind of areas that play into that. Next. And so then there's this term, and this is every housing in the state now. It's called needed housing. Okay. And what it says, a local government may adopt and apply only clear and objective standards, conditions and procedures regulating the development of housing, including needed housing. And including needed housing means needed housing now. And since, what was it, since 2018? Yeah. And so there's been a lot of case law about this recently, and people are saying, well, you know, second homes and in areas in or, you know, since no, the courts have come down, Lucas come down again and again, all housing is needed housing.
Jeff, do you have any recent experience with that?
No, I don't know that at all. And the reason I bring this up is because they're saying everything has to be clear and objective standards. Okay, this is serious stuff to the land use person, which we all know, a lot of the things, especially around wetlands and sensitive areas, are these very subjective kind of terminologies. So, you know, you can't have that anymore. It's saying you have to have a clear and objective way to get this housing here. That's why I said this is all about pipelines and supply now. And that's why the state's taking this very seriously now. And people are testing it all over the state. Salem just had a pretty big one. And yet it keeps coming back that no, sorry, the housing is there and it's got, you know, it's clear and objective. So anyhow, that's another term you'll hear a lot. It's needed housing. Okay. Next up. And so you can have this clear and objective standard. The only way you can have this kind of subjective is you have to have the clear and objective. The alternative can be a subjective, but then that's a density bonus and all that other stuff. Okay. And so today, the topic for today, capacity building. And I've broken it down into what I like to call two areas in a Venn diagram. I'm going to do infographic day is what I'm calling this. Organizational, operational capacity building. Okay. And there's overlap in these things. And I'm not going to belabor that. But next one. So when I'm talking organizational strategy or capacity, we're talking about housing, and then there's planning, policy, administrative kind of organizational. And this is just a organizational chart from my first planning job in Blaine County, Idaho. And that's what their county of 20,000 people. That's the planning department in that county. And then you know, so that's from the planning side. But then, as we heard over and over again, Clatsop County didn't have any housing organization staffing. I know that we don't have any housing organization staffing. I don't think anyone in this room does in our county. And so the one difference you'll really see, and I showed earlier in the kickoff meeting, that organizational capacity of these mountain town communities and the conversations I had this past week with these others. You know, they have them at the county level, at the city level. They will have people working in housing and not just land use planning. They're working in housing and affordable housing at that level. And then, you know, that builds capacity there. And so then there's operational capacity, and that's what I call programming and policy development. And so this is from Bend, Oregon's website. I'm going to talk about their affordable housing fee, affordable housing. So I'm trying to reference other areas as well, also in Oregon, that have dedicated organization and operational capacity in putting together programs and policies for these efforts. Okay, next one. And so when we think about organizational, you heard Alyssa talk about, you know, federal and state and all these different funding streams, but organizationally, you know, there's also the regional. Summit County, Colorado has a Summit County Housing Department that is housed in the county, but they have a Summit County combined regional housing. And so it is a lot like the Aspen, Pitkin, and these others, where it's a broader and it's regional. It's not based upon the county. It's, you know, some goes into other counties at certain efforts because they do it a lot by valley or basin, but they have a lot that are driving from, you know, 2 or 3 different counties into their area. So it's often by employment worksheds. And so local down to county, city, and then the planning kind of organization. We know almost every organization in our area has at least 1 or 2 professionals working in the planning. You know, there's just smaller communities like in Tillamook County that will they don't have actual planning staff. They may have contracted out, or a city administrator does that. But then policy and administrative is also part of that organization. Because if Alyssa brought it up, but funding, kind of expertise that Don's talking about in tax and bonding, grant, public-private partnership, all those kind of funding and streams, and being able to have the expertise on staff or within your organizational capacity to deal with those things is key. So, next up. And so I use Summit County, and I gave you guys this document. This is from Summit County, I think 2018, October 2018. And so this is the housing projects number 4. Okay, so that is part, I gave you the first few pages of this document. And this document's up on our Housing Matters page, task force page, next. Yeah, and so these are all the different projects, housing projects in the Basin area that they're working. Next up, okay, and they got the flashy pictures of all of the nice, and then the next slide, the data and all the, how many units, the density, how much price, the target AMI, and all that. It's a great document. It's also what I think when we were talking about a Bruce, city historic, Bruce, mayor was talking about, we also have to be able to, right? If we're going to do this, how we're going to get there is being able to communicate this to everyone. And this is another reason why I have this, because this is what people want. When we came to the meeting, first meeting, everybody, this is what we want to do. We want it now. We want projects now. Okay, and so that's why 2/3 of this is about projects. Next. But what I want to point out is it starts here. Okay, and to next, it starts with this. Deed restricted inventory in the county dates back to the 1970s, limiting short-term rentals and requiring local employment. And then it talks about covenants, policies, strategies have greatly evolved. Next, please. And so then it goes into the tools and strategies and what Alyssa talked about, partnerships. It talks about these partnerships and leveraging these partnerships to get the funding. And the one thing I want everyone to take away from this meeting is on the funding. When I talk about the combined, this is Summit County Combined Housing Authority. I talk with each one, and we'll have them on next week so we can bounce questions off of them. So if you get a chance to read some of these documents that I've referred to before the next meeting. But Summit County has 2 local designated funding sources for employee housing. There's a voter approved local 5A sales tax of 0.125% that is effective in perpetuity. Sales tax going to affordable housing in perpetuity. And that was voted in, right? And so I talked about back there the different funding streams and how you have to have the expertise in that. And fascinating story on that, it was in the middle of COVID. And they had just done the update of the 5-year horizon for the first time they got that. And they said, we should do it now. There's such a housing need. It's crisis time. And they went out, they got regionally, there was one community that really was not wanting to do it. But they said, we will not speak against it. We will be on board. And so that's the kind of partnerships and funding that we can talk about as we move forward. Okay, and then so operational. There's the organizational, building that capacity, and then there's the operation. And so you have all these different programs we talk about. I mean, everything from the old Section 8 and low-income tax credit stuff down to some of these innovative ones that we've talked about. I think Steve, we talked about that housing helps and lease to locals. Those are mentioned in these documents, these Summit County documents, but some of these newer programs. But you've got your affordable housing fees and funds that whether it's a mitigation fee for employees for each housing unit development. These are the kind of programs that work within. We have to build that capacity, and then the policies that get us there. And that's the pipeline that I talk about. It's building these policies. And those are the foundational kind of documents. The intergovernmental agreement that set up this kind of organization, the development code amendments, whether it's the ones to get us through that kind of Clatsop County housing matrix that we're doing. There's a lot of zoning amendments that we can take from that. There's newer ones developing, and inclusionary housing ordinances, housing overlays, deed restrictions, both rental and ownership. We'll look at that as an example here in a minute. Land swaps, capacity, through capacity analysis, urban reserves and small scale UGB expansions, those kind of things, all these different policies that whether it's one jurisdiction or the region has to start looking at moving forward this legislation to get these programs in place and building that organization fast. Okay, next up. So one of the other, my second infographic of the day is the sand key. And this is the original sand key diagram showing boiler, steam pipe, engine, condenser, deep. So that's how he visualized this sand key there. Okay, next slide. And so I don't know if you guys have been to USA Facts, but it's a great website and data for the data geeks out there. And it shows these sand keys of, you can see from revenue to expenditures, you know, where your money comes from at the federal level, total revenue to where's it going? 6.3 trillion. And so if you click on this one, I think the revenue, it goes from this tax revenue. Okay. And then it accordions out and shows you a breakdown of where that money comes from. Where's our money coming from? And you can click on that and find more detail on each one of these things. Other side, if you go to the spending, then where after we collect this money, where's it going to? Okay, and so, you know, and they put it into established justice, provide the common defense and general welfare, that, you know, the common phrases, then it goes down all the way down into law enforcement, national defense, non-cash programs for the aid and disadvantaged. It breaks it down into each kind of funding stream that goes through that funding level. And so that's the way I think of the next slide, that the state is looking. Okay, so the state is currently got two working groups, one on housing needs and one on capacity. And they're looking at this kind of needs and supply chain kind of thing. How are we forecasting our growth? Then what's that projected need, buildable lands and the housing needs? How are we accommodating that? And then how are we promoting that needed housing? So how are we kind of laying the foundation or the pipe for this housing supply for the future? Okay, so next. So okay. And so I took from San Miguel County, Telluride area, and you'll see all of them is usually based upon these needs reports, right? San Miguel County Housing Need Assessment. Okay, this was done in 2018. Economics of Land did it. Okay, and this is from that. This is from the state study or the housing needs study for Clatsop County. And click. You know, I showed this earlier. It's saying by 2040, we're going to need around 4,000 units in Clatsop County to meet our housing needs. Okay. That's from that study. Okay. That's and so thinking about it, you know, that study for that San Miguel did, you know, they look at how many jobs are going to be needed. Okay. They do it by a jobs-based approach. And then they say, you know, this is the overview. Okay, so how much are employees? How much are multiple jobs? So that factors out. Then where do they go? Single family apartment down to other types, and for the future housing needs. And next one, and where? So where in our county are we going to? Are these going to go because of the jobs? Okay, and that's another future housing. Okay. And then to think of that into a housing type in a more detail from the inbound commuters, and then where from their studies of their own housing inventory, where they're wanting in a survey of house and employees, where are they wanting to go? And so they also factor that in, okay, next one. And so then it will tell you, this is where we're gonna address these in our community. And that's where they try to say, this is how and where we want to grow. And so they do this through their housing needs approach, okay? And so this is a same thing, just different way of looking at it. I think one more of those. Yeah, and so down to ownership, rental, and down to breaking out that into each one of their communities. And so, next slide, please. So my second one, my little second example was from the one of the recent historians from last week. You'll see down here in the corner, new apartments planned for Seaside. Okay, so click on it. And so it says 2 properties used as a wrecking yard off of Highway 101 could be converted into 10-unit apartment complex with open space or playground. And it says down here at the end, I think anything we can do to get more workforce housing is great. Planning Commissioner Seth Morrissey said, I'm all for it, okay? And so that's an article ripped from the headlines of the historian, okay? And so I did that in a comparison with Seaguard Apartments, which was a development we did back in Cannon Beach in 2018 as our first kind of affordable housing project. And this is the development agreement from that project. And so next one. And so I did the next quiz or homework assignment the following week on these 2. So are the units proposed in Seaside truly workforce housing? Anybody? Because I got the same response on that. I think 3 people. They're not from anything that I can read. Jeff, do you know?
I don't want to go too far into the weeds on that because
Okay.
it's going to be in front of our
pending.
council soon.
It's
And
pending,
I don't want to
okay?
create an issue.
So not that I know, okay, are those in Cannon Beach work? Well, sort of, okay? And the reason I say that is because that development agreement was for 10 years, 8 units, 10 years. They were set at AMI limit, but only 10 years. And you remember that slide back to Oregon Code, 30 years, right? No, so we only got it for 10 years. And then as the RAMI doesn't match exactly the kind of restrictions either. So who or what guarantees the Seaside units are workforce? Well, we don't know if they are. What guarantees the units in Cannon Beach are workforce? We do, the local jurisdiction. So I get a yearly report from the owner, and we send them the yearly update from Clatsop County's HUD, AMI. And then for how long, like I said, 10 years, how can we guarantee future units are truly workforce housing units? That's what we're going to talk about as the deed restriction. Okay, next. So I gave you guys this draft regional workforce housing deed restriction. So if you guys look at that. This is off of, I think, some county fire control. And I've highlighted some of the key components of each one of these, okay? And so if you'll go to page 2, it says must be guaranteed in theirs. What does it say? In perpetuity through a deed restriction. So if you talk to any of these areas, the jurisdictions that have been doing this for 30 or 40 years, I think the first thing they tell you is just like this. You got to get it for in perpetuity. You do not do 30 years, but 10 years, it's in perpetuity. It's the first thing we learn is what the lady from Aspen County, it's one of the first things she said to me. She said, that's the first thing we learned. Now it's in 1900s. And then you'll see in Article 4 on page 3. When we talked about employment, and I talked about a workforce housing model, and I was talking about Alyssa's, what did you call it?
The naturally occurring.
Naturally occurring. So this is their area discussing that on local employment and who qualifies for this program. Okay? At least 30 hours per week on an annual basis. Then they've got, and the reason I brought this up is because I think it's great to talk about, is all of the areas that these communities are dealing with, because these are the things that arise. And if you're just putting together a program out of the blue, who knows about retirees or partial retirement or housing mobility for retirees and, all these different things come up because, if you're going to have these programs and they're going to be in perpetuity, these people will be aging out in place. And so do you kick them out after they're finished working in your community? How do you evolve with that program? These are the things that are learning lessons as we learn from these other communities that have been doing it for years. How do you put forward those kind of thoughts as you move through that? So can I ask this from all the jurisdictions that are here and those also on Zoom, how many deed restricted units have you guys worked on in the county? Anybody?
I don't know of any instances that.
Yeah.
I don't know of any in Gilbert.
Yeah, is that Carol?
No, it's Angelina. Carol couldn't make it and Chad's on vacation.
Oh, yeah. And so you don't know of any either?
Yeah, I don't know of any.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah. So this is all new terrain, I think, for us as a region. And so that's why I want us to bring this document up, is to say, as a foundational document, really the three kind of things, areas we want to start is this right here as a deed restriction. And, second would be the intergovernmental agreement that would get the organization up and running. Whether, as Don had suggested, even just helping Alyssa have one more position. And then how does that structure? Because that intergovernmental agreement, which we'll talk about more next time, would also talk about, okay, how much does the county put up? We put up all the different jurisdictions. Is that done by, and I had the conversation with each one of these folks. How did you guys work it out? How's that changed? Those kind of things are the great questions to ask these people that have been doing it for a while. And I got to hopefully the lady that will speak next month for us, from Aston Pitkin, she's been there since 1992. And so she's seen that program really kind of change and develop along the way. And, so there's references in here to other programs. I think the Housing Helps program and so other things, but those documents are also up on our Housing Matters website. So but then some of the other points I wanted to talk about are the primary residence. So on page 5, an owner or renter, when authorized of a deed restricted property, must occupy the property as their principal place of residence at least 9 months of the year. And then it talks about the ownership entity. And this is all written from a perspective that there would be a regional authority. Okay. We have not come to that agreement yet, but that is just as the hypothetical perspective here. And one of the things I wanted to just kind of bring up is we will be talking about through our code audit meeting in our next month's code audit meeting is that we're going to be looking at what's called a public benefits development. It's this idea that if someone gives some workforce housing accessory dwelling, then they get some kind of extra square footage or some kind of density bonus type of thing. And so we're going to go that method. And the way that we're drafting the ordinance is that could work. Also, we have a TDR type of element for that kind of thing. So transfer of development right type of stuff. And so this could work as a regional, part of a regional program as well. So it's not just for the city. So it's a thought that we're going to throw out to our joint work session, which is our designer review board, planning commission, and city council, to talk about these kind of things. So it'll get them thinking about these things as well. But basically, I know of only one in Cannon Beach that does a deed restriction, and that's that Sea Larkin that I showed you. And that is also available online. Any thoughts on this? Or, you know, I know it's the first time you've seen that, and but any thoughts on this? It's this idea that you have to have this secondary market. I mean, I know we would love to think that the free market's going to solve it, and there's a thought that you know, if we just do everything right, it would. But what we've learned, it's not. It's not solving the housing issue. The state's looking at that and saying it's not solving the issue. So how do we make the efforts to form the secondary market? Any thoughts, anybody?
I mean, what I think you're doing a really good job of is showing how like multiple tools have to go together, right? This is the deed restriction would be one piece of probably a larger development agreement, right? If you have a developer who's even interested in saying, hey, I want your regulatory help, I want your financial help, whatever, I want your political help, I'm willing to have this conversation with you, right? You're gonna probably use this development agreement. And you might say, hey, the development agreement's gonna have a deed restriction, and it's gonna have this other thing about owner occupancy. Maybe there'll be some community benefits agreements in there. And so I kind of like the menu approach of, hey, here's a bunch of things that could come in. And then I think it's the matchmaking. Hey, which developer makes the most sense in Seaside who wants to be in this kind of agreement? Hey, what resources does Cannon Beach even have to put on the table that give us leverage to get a developer into an agreement like this?
Right.
Right, and sort of, how do you put all of the different things together into this agreement? So this is a great, to me, a great tool if it, fits into the larger puzzle pieces, so.
Yeah. Anybody, like Jeff, you're dealing right now, like you said, with this one's coming to city council, right? We have one parallel, some similar thing, and it's got a mix as well. And so I think that this kind of conversation will likely happen with them as well. So, it's this ability. I think there's there's so much need out there for affordable workforce housing right now that people know that they want to be able to do it. Some of the programs that I've talked to that are really working successfully are those, who brought up was it Jay? Were you the one that brought up the one about, they asked me a question, kind of was about the ability for a owner to purchase like a units in like a hotel or something like that. Was that you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so, they're working on things like that in the non-communities. And so that was one of the other things I was going to see.
Well, the example is I have a developer who has built apartments and he leases the apartments to corporations, local people. And those people are run in and out of those apartments, short term, some long term, some short term. And so the question then became, how is that addressed in the code? I mean, it's a long-term lease, but none of the tenants stay the same. And so the question then becomes, is this some sort of loophole on short-term rentals? Or
Because it's less than 30 days.
it's less than 30 days in some cases. And so we were looking at, in a new project, would we authorize some parts of that project to become short-term employment rentals? And then maybe there's some category. I called it corporate housing.
Yeah. corporate
Yeah.
housing.
And so I don't know what the answer is. I still don't completely have a grasp on it, but it's something that is happening. And the question is, do we want to promote it and what are the pluses and minuses of it?
Yeah.
I think from like, we're kind of one of the largest employers in the region, Columbia Memorial. That model would be very appealing to us because, especially now with the amount of transitional workforce we have, the travelers, we have consistently been delayed in getting travelers here because of the ability for them to find a place to land. So we, as an organization, have to really think about how many properties do we want to buy and flip into units that can be used. We're keeping them long term, but the people that live in them might be there for 6 months, 9 months, a year,
Right.
3 months.
What is your typical contract for example?
Usually 3 months, 3 months, but many of them extend to 6 months, 9 months. We've had some travelers who have been with us for 15+ months.
By our code, that would be the long term.
Right.
So.
And that would be ours as well, but we've got a couple of businesses that are bringing them in for 30 days, 20 days,
Yeah.
3 weeks. We got a peak season, we need 10 places to. I almost used the word store. I mean, we basically we're finding a place to stick them in while they work for us, and then they maybe move on, or we don't need them.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's similar to, kind of the mountain communities have the kind of dormitory type.
Yeah.
Housing.
Yep. And we've authorized that too, no one's jumped on it.
They don't have. Some need to be within 20 minutes because of the hall requirements.
Yeah. So any other thoughts on the deed restriction, component?
So I apologize. One of the things I was wondering is, do we have anybody from the development community that needs to be at this table too? Because we have a group of developers who have been in the community for many, many years, sometimes generations. And they are not aware or unfamiliar or afraid of these types of projects.
Sure.
And that's just too much work.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Picturing three of my favorite developers.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think that is, definitely, we talked about when we started the task force, at what point do we want to start bringing in the development community, the advocates? It's not just the development, we're the advocates. And so bringing in those others to these conversations, my thought was to at least get through next week, which is the, kind of the needs, the asset mapping portion. That's kind of the first series. And then we start getting into kind of what I'm saying, these foundational documents. That might be the point where we bring those in.
I like the menu, we've got lots of options available, but I think the people who are on the ground, if we're wanting to develop a community to buy in, we need to get them in earlier, rather than, oh, by the way, here are all of our solutions. So,
I would be curious to know what kind of items, things, requirements that the development community would appeal to them to actually voluntarily enter into a deed restriction.
Yeah, and so,
Have a list of what's worked in the past.
Yeah.
In certain places, and would it be advertised to them?
Yeah.
So any segue off that for you, 'cause a lot of people out there know where development contact me about this issue. Having the zoning, land use, development structure available to make it, economically feasible for them to do. I think we have a lot of people willing and want to do that. But they don't feel like they have that environment. So I think if you brought them to the table, have them be a part of the process, then we can find out exactly what you were saying. What are the obstacles? What do we need to overcome? Because, a lot of the constituents in this my district, they don't want government funded affordable housing, workforce housing, because, and it's not a lack of compassion, honestly, everyone wants people to have a home, they want people to be housed. It's not only is it got, taxpayer money to build these, you talk about perpetuity, well, you gotta pay for them forever too. So they're subsidizing, the taxpayers are subsidizing these forever. So if they're built by private developers, managed by private development, takes it off the taxpayer shoulders. And I think that's the feedback I get, that's what we want. That's what the, taxpayer or our constituents want. They want the housing, they don't want it on the taxpayer's back, but they want, us, the individuals and our agencies to create paths that make it appealing and make it, advantageous for developers to do that.
And so I think next month when we talk with the mountain communities, I think it's a good, we'll get to hear a little bit of both. Because I think it's gonna be a balance. I think it's gonna be very difficult for anyone to get all private side affordable housing. It hasn't happened in the past. Does anybody know of any? I don't know. In Clatsop County. It's not gonna happen. But we can do what we can to make that, approach streamline or whatever the incentives that can happen. But there's the other approach that we have to have where as well, and I think it's going to come down to having some very difficult conversations of inclusionary housing and having the ordinances in place that certain percentages are given to affordable housing. And I think that's what this is about, is bringing those difficult conversations up and being able to talk through those together. Because, I will keep going back to the history. We have not seen affordable housing. We're seeing fewer and fewer of our workforce being able to survive here. And the market's not solving. So how do we solve that moving forward? And so the development community, if you guys know of the development community that you want, contact her, you have your, I think Jay said 2 or 3, or Jeff, you know a few as well that are in Seaside, send those contacts to me or forward them to me and we can get them on that and we can start talking about November, possibly having that as part of that conversation. And then to kind of segue a little bit, I'm not going to put Chet on the spot, but I want to introduce Chet. And because we're going to use a similar type of, scenario, I think that I use in the homework assignments. We're going to use a similar to one that he kind of brought forward with us surplus land or those kind of areas in the county that may not be within UGBs or things like that. And Chet, you want to just kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't want to see the stage, but I'll get close to my.
Sure.
Thanks, Jeff, for the opportunity to speak for just a minute. So I was enticed by this offer of surplus land by the county, thank you. Especially the 11 acres down in Arch Cape. Really with the vision of developing an affordable housing community of tiny homes, cottage clusters, things with minimal impact on the environment, but also that create a nice sense of community. So 4 or 5 little homes in a semicircle, some shared common space perhaps. And the question is, could we do that as a nonprofit? And so we've actually recently formed a nonprofit called North Coast Housing Solutions. Doing our due diligence on the property right now. Thanks, Gail, for the meeting last week. We're almost all the way through the big ticket items. Clearly fundraising is an issue. We're looking for partnerships broadly for that. But really the idea is to build very attractive but affordable housing, targeting at least that 80% area median income. Average 60 would be great. But also to do it in a way that's acceptable to the local communities. Of course, we have some environmentalists in the community we'll need to appease. We have some neighbors we'll want to appease. Having a lot of conversations right now, getting a lot of really great feedback. Certainly open to feedback here as well, and looking at various funding models to fund that, from grants and donations all the way to REITs and things like that, if we're able to do that, using the income from the property basically to fund the next project. That's our goal, is to be able to build about 50 units on this property, generate somewhere around $500,000 a year in rent, and then that would allow us to do another small project each year after that, purchase the land and construct our multifamily. So that's our hope, but brand new to the space, live in Cannon Beach now, the last 2.5 years, but love to get to know everybody, love to get some more feedback on our ideas.
And so Chet,
Yeah.
so first off, who have you spoken to so far? Because we're talking about organization capacity, right? So who were your first contacts coming from the development side.
Sure. So talked to the previous property owner, who actually bailed out on the property, it was foreclosed. Maybe after him, maybe the one after. So what the barriers were there, which included a highway interchange was required, a slightly different access than the one we're looking at. We really couldn't afford that, but called with ODOT yesterday. They don't appear to be requiring that. Let's use East Beach Lane and East Shingle Mill to access the property. So fire requirements, I had to talk to Kennedy's Rural Fire District. They seem okay with just sprinklers on the property, as opposed to needing to pressurize the fire hydrants if you're having trouble even making it to the existing homes up there. Other groups we started to talk to, the Rebuilding Center in Portland, about using surplus building materials. Again, we want to make these attractive. We're not talking about nailing together little shacks, but if we can source nice set of matching windows and doors, which I hear are about a year out right now in terms of supply chain. And then I have an architect up in Astoria who's willing to do designs around those surplus materials. So we actually have a cottage designed around materials. Other groups that we've talked to include just local residents who are enthusiastic about the idea, willing to volunteer their time for construction, even to some extent deconstruction. Again, so we can deal with the asbestos permits and things like that. May even try to do some salvage locally on the coast as well as purchasing from the Rebuilding Center in Portland. So
And is part of a water district or some other?
yeah, so just got an email back from the water and sewer district, which is great. They have been giving us an answer. I was a little late contacting them, but they're looking into again with the 50. We're looking at mostly single occupancy, I think, for these cottages, maybe double occupancy. We appear to have enough family housing, I'm told, at least based on the latest report that I've seen, but really we're missing that workforce out. Single person or pairs, roommates, as opposed to the larger structure. So we're not targeting, massive multifamily structures, but rather housing workers, people in smaller areas. So 50 to 100 residents, and they're doing the check right now to see if water and sewer overload their capacity. I suspect not.
So there is sewer.
There is sewer nearby. Okay. Talking to local homeowners there. There's a massive backlog in getting foundations poured. It's just there or everywhere, 1 year wait. Even for the person who has a family relationship with the person who poured the concrete. So we're looking at doing post and beam or other similar constructions. We'll need to look at GIS, look at the building, some building requirements on this particular piece of land, but trying to get around these things that are creating backlogs. For cost and for feasibility, so we can really try to get something in the ground soon, use it as a proof of concept, use that to fundraise. The donor community, at least in Canada, appears to be very supportive. And so once we actually have a structure, the person happy living in that structure and show that, I think that we'll be able to raise some significant donations. And then of course, federal grants. I'm on the steep learning curve. That's my background. So I've managed about $54 million of federal grants in my career, not in affordable housing. Totally unrelated field, but trying to learn what's out there, what we can do to apply for grants to try to fund some of this as well.
To that end, I guess that's why you're pursuing a nonprofit structure rather than an LLC or something else.
Exactly.
And I assume you're familiar with like community development corporations, CDCs, and is that sort of the model that you're trying to use, right? They're essentially developers who are with a community development mission.
Yeah, I need to learn more about that specifically. I've spent a lot of time looking at land trusts, which to be honest, I'm not totally in favor of. I can tell you why offline maybe. Yeah, but I think that we would hold this as a nonprofit in perpetuity. That's been our modeling before. That became the buzzword today. And really just manage these as rentals, obviously looking for partners for management. So you need to be a property manager, but we essentially build them with volunteers or employing people who are reentering the workforce at a fair wage. But again, trying to create that pipeline both with recycled building materials as well as helping train maybe the next generation of workers, looking at partnering with some of the local schools that have internships for construction. So try to do an affordable building model, affordable materials, affordable labor, and not taking advantage of anyone, but trying to do it affordably. And then get structures in the ground, they start to generate rent, and then that funds the organization to do more projects.
Right, so your mission is more than just real estate development. You've got this other community development, wealth creation, job training kind of. So it very much sounds like a community development corporation, a CDC with a mission. And it strikes me how much it aligns with the mission of this group, essentially figuring out ways to create housing that actually allows people to thrive, not just, hey, build a building and move on to the next building. So it'd be really interesting to talk about community development corporations do qualify for certain types of funding.
Okay, good. to know.
So it'd be interesting to just follow with you.
Yes, love to follow.
Two of us,
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, it's been on my list when she started speaking.
And I think that the beauty of this, is that, you know, what's the other one you said, Devin, it's so important, it's a area.
Oh, Casa, which is a land trust.
Yeah, you- it's a little bit off.
So the reason I wanted, you know, invited Chad, and hopefully we'll have him back next month. I don't know if your schedule works, but we'll get you the next question. But to talk about this further is because this is also, you know, when we talk about a lot of the communities, how they solve this kind of gaps, you know, John's concerned about, you know, keeping the private, you know, engine going, that's, you've got to have that. But these are the groups, they're one of those elements that keep those kind of partnerships going. Can they fill those gaps that are necessary to help the public work with the private and like you said, keep the engine, the money going back into the project and into the community and jobs. That's the other thing that's often, but.
So the other thing, I don't know if this would play a role in what you're looking at, but Jolene's first cousin, which was the SRO in Portland, the developer for that decided that instead of trying to go get traditional funding from a bank, because people in Portland know that this type of housing is needed, much like the type of housing you're talking about in Cape, they went to the community itself and said, if you invest in this project, here's your return on investment over the next 10 years or 5 or 10 years. They raised $300,000 in 24 hours. Now, granted, that's in a metro area or in a rural area. But if you want to look at examples where that's occurred on the coast, the co-op did it. Right? That's how the Astoria Co-op financed a significant chunk of the new store. And so there's some other things you can think about as well in terms of, in addition to all of the housing and grants, there's some other interesting things I think happening around funding and thinking about funding in some new creative ways.
Yeah, I like that example of the crowdfunding. Actually just had coffee earlier this morning with the architects up in Astoria. She mentioned that REITs are actually very stable. REITs on affordable housing, apparently, who knew there was such a thing, a very stable return on investment, 3%. So for those people who have philanthropic interest, but also maybe want a low tiny return, especially given the current state of the stock and bond market, something like 3% a year guaranteed for 10 years, as you said, might be a pretty enticing investment, and that could give us the financial backing without having to go out with low interest rate loans and other things, which I'm willing to do, but to be honest, I'm averse to giving banks more money, right, to do this, and rather finance it with caring members of our community, right? We want to back it, and maybe they get a little return, maybe it's just a nonprofit donation for them, which would work with the nonprofit model.
So one of the things, one reason I wanted you to say something today, is because you identified whether it was the fire district, whether it's the water sewer districts. There are a lot of people or a lot of groups you mentioned that aren't part of this. But we'll need to be, just as the development community we talked about, need to be part of this and the advocacies and the banking and financial segment. You know, these are all that play a part and role in this kind of successful organizational capacity. Ones that I didn't even really put up on the sheet or the PowerPoints of those connectors. But you know, it is definitely a network of players that need to be involved in this. And so I think Chet, when he came forward and just reached out and heard we were doing something like this, that those are the kind of people that are starting to say, hey, there is some interest here and some growing capacity, and we need to you know, bring those people in and they can help and work with us in those models moving forward. So thanks, Chad. Thank you. And so next up, so I'm amazed. So this is the first one, like if we would have had the person from Summit County, we would be dead on the time period the first time without me trying to rush everybody through everything. But talking about moving forward, next slide, please. I talked about this. So my thought is that, you know, I've talked about it for a while now, but after this next meeting on the asset mapping, which I'm hoping to get with Amanda and Zach and work with others, Jay and the other planners, and Gil, everyone. And talk about this portion of how and where we grow discussion and bringing that to the next one. And then I back away, hand it off to Denise. And then Denise, then, you know, she's gonna, the last three, and she can find the chats and the others and the Alyssa's that will be the next ones that will hopefully build that capacity to move us into a organizational and operational capacity moving forward. So that's my thought. Does this, you got any thoughts on that? Anybody? Does it seem like a sensible game plan moving forward? Like I said, I'm going to give you two more scenarios, and so I'll give you a summary next Wednesday of the notes and everything that came out of this. Then the next one, I'll have a homework assignment with probably very similar to what Chet just brought forward, and then I have a surprise fourth one. And so then we will gather again, do this asset mapping exercise, and then we will start talking about, you know, like introduce this document, the deed restriction of this one. The next one, I'm going to introduce the intergovernmental agreement document, and then we will have discussion on that organizational alignment moving forward. Does that make sense to everybody? Any thoughts or comments? Well, I appreciate everybody for coming out. This is, you know, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot, you know, one of the things I wanted to point out with today's meeting, the organizational capacity, is that, you know, this is difficult. Getting weekly homework assignments, I don't expect you guys to really do that, but you know, if we had the organizational capacity, you could assign that to someone to do that, or your organization. Yeah, or Jeff, right. But you know, that's really where we're coming at, is that we need to build that regionally. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some time, but we've really got to, we've got a great start with Alyssa coming into our region, and we've got others like Chet that are really involved and want to be part of this. So I think we just need to leverage that and move that forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's the next steps. Anybody, once again, if you don't get an email by the end of next Wednesday and you're not getting our emails, let me know, send me an email, and we will get this posted. All of these meetings are posted on our website, which is the City of Cannon Beach website. Under our meeting and agenda page, you can just look over there. It's got a link to that, or you can always just Google Cannon Beach Housing Matters, and that leads you to that Housing Matters where we're collecting all the information. One of the things I want to talk about at the next meeting, as we start segueing into Denise facilitating some of these discussions, is where do we want to house this kind of information moving forward at one of the more classic regional site. You know, it may just be starting up a new website under that. So, but thank you all. Thanks for coming out. And if you've got any comments or questions of how we can do this better, make the next meeting better, always open to that.
Thank you, Jeff.
This.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Jeff, the next meeting. Fourth.
Oh, yeah, next, yeah, can you hit the next slide? Next. There.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, next meeting.
You can worry about what.
Thanks, Ross.
Yeah. Probably.